Imagine an icy mountain, a forgotten tragedy, and an aging German shepherd who refuses to give up the truth. In just a few moments, you will see a lone dog uncover a secret buried under 50 years of snow. A secret powerful enough to reunite a broken family and change a lonely man's life forever. This is a story of loyalty, redemption, and unexpected tears.
BP is dropping fast.
If you're here, stay with us until the very end, because the ending will stay in your heart long after the video ends. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe to support our channel and join our Soul Pause family. Snow had a way of erasing the past, or so Owen Carter liked to pretend. It lay in thick, quiet sheets over the pines of northern Minnesota, burying old trails, old mistakes, and the echoes of sirens that still rang in his dreams. At 58, retired from a life as a search and rescue cop, he wore his faded orange rescue jacket like a relic from another war, a little frayed at the cuffs, stained with smoke he could never quite wash out. The cabin he lived in sat at the end of a plowed road, alone at the edge of a frozen lake, the kind of place people chose when they didn't want to be found. The only soul who refused to honor that wish was the German shepherd snoring by the wood stove. Ranger's coat was a rich black and tan blanket against the firelight, his muzzle frosted with gray. He had once raced through blizzards beside Owen on rescue missions, GPS collar blinking, paws tough as crampons. Now, arthritis gnawed at his hips, and he preferred warm quilts to frozen ravines. Or he had, until the storm. The blizzard had come down from Canada 4 days ago, a white fist closing over the forest. During the night, somewhere up on Hollow Ridge, a section of hillside had given way under the weight of the snow, the way Owen's life once had under the weight of a single bad call. On the fourth morning, as pale blue dawn seeped through the frosted windows, Owen stood in the kitchen, both hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, watching the tree line. Ranger had slipped out at first light, nose to the wind, ignoring the soft cushion by the stove. "You're nuttier than I am," Owen had muttered, pulling the door shut against the knife-edge cold. Now he waited, knee throbbing with the pressure drop, the same knee that had taken a chunk of rebar when a parking garage collapsed on a December night 15 years back. It pulsed with a slow, stubborn ache, like an old grudge that refused to fade. Movement at the edge of the forest caught his eye. Ranger emerged from between the snow-laden pines, not with the easy, loping trot of a retired house dog, but with a deliberate, tactical advance. Head low, body tight, he moved one careful step at a time, as if each patch of snow might hide something dangerous. Owen frowned and opened the back door. The cold leapt into the cabin like a living thing. "Ranger, inside," he called. "You're not a rookie anymore. You'll seize up out there." The dog climbed the steps slowly, his back legs stiff, and that alone would have worried Owen. But it was the thing clamped in Ranger's jaws that stopped him short. It wasn't a stick or a bone. It was a lump of something dark, the size of a grapefruit, crusted in dirty ice. Ranger moved past Owen without so much as a twitch toward the treat jar, stopped in the center of the kitchen, and lowered himself into a sit so precise it could have been drawn with a ruler. His paws aligned, his back straight, chest squared toward the object. He set the lump carefully on the tile with a heavy, dull thud. Then he stared at it. Not a curious, "What's this?" look. It was a fixed, unblinking gaze that reached back through time to every avalanche beacon, every buried car, every trapped child they'd ever found together. "Don't start," Owen muttered, setting his mug down. "We're off the clock, remember?" He knelt, knee cracking, and reached for the object, intending to toss it into the snowbank. The weight stopped him. It was heavier than it looked, far denser than rock-hard snow. The surface felt wrong, not like river stone or field rock, but rough, pitted, with strange, glossy patches that slid under his fingertips like frozen glass. A faint, acrid scent rose as the ice melted in the warmth of his hand. Not the clean bite of winter air, not the mineral tang of lake water. It was the smell of something burned long ago, char and metal, and a whisper of sulfur. A smell that belonged in collapsed buildings and overturned tankers, not on a quiet ridge in Minnesota. A shiver crawled up his spine despite the stove's heat. "What have you got there, partner?" he murmured. Ranger hadn't moved. The cloudy film that often softened the dog's eyes in the evenings was gone. In its place burned an intense laser focus. He looked from the object to Owen and back again. A low whine building in his throat, high and urgent, like a siren muffled under snow. Owen knew that posture. He had seen it in training videos and in the middle of shrieking blizzards. The passive alert of a working dog who believed he had found something that mattered. A live scent, a buried body, the trace of danger. "It's a rock," Owen said aloud, more to himself than to Ranger. "There's no collapsed mall up on the ridge, no gas explosion, just birch trees and my bad decisions." He pushed to his feet, intending to pitch the lump back outside. Before he could reach for the door, Ranger moved. For a dog with creaky joints, the speed was shocking. He blurred across the floor and planted himself squarely between Owen and the exit, hackles barely raised but body locked, as solid as a sandbag in a flood. He uttered a single sharp sound, not a bark, not a whine, something in between. A correction. The same sound he'd used years ago when Owen missed a faint cry under the wind, when he'd been about to declare a hopeless search and go home, and Ranger had refused to quit. "You think it's real," Owen whispered, meeting the dog's eyes. For a moment, under the yellow kitchen light, the room blurred. Not from age, from memory. Another winter, another call. A minivan under a plow drift, a tiny pink mitten pressed against glass. Ranger's paw scraping at the snow, refusing to move on until they dug where no one else believed they should. The mitten had belonged to a little girl whose mother had sent Owen a Christmas card every year since, though he'd stopped opening his mail after the divorce. The rock's burnt smell crawled deeper into his mind, stirring up scenes he'd carefully buried beneath routine and solitude. Ranger's stare did something no sermon, no therapist had managed to do. It cut through the numbness. If he dismissed the dog now, if he said, "It's nothing," and dropped the lump into a drift, he wouldn't just be tossing a rock. He'd be telling the only partner who'd stayed that his instincts no longer mattered, that his life's work was a trick of an aging brain. And that, somehow, hurt worse than the idea of trudging through waist-deep snow on a bad knee. Owen exhaled slowly, the sound halfway between a sigh and a surrender. "Okay, hero," he said quietly. "Okay, you win." Ranger's body loosened, tension draining from his shoulders. His tail gave a cautious thump, as if he knew this was more than a walk. It was a mission. Owen slipped on his scarred orange rescue jacket, pulled his boots tight, and tucked the strange black lump into an inner pocket where the warmth of his chest could melt the ice, but not the questions. At the door, he hesitated, looking out at the vast white world, the ridge a dark line against a pewter sky. Somewhere out there, under all that snow, something had waited a long time for someone to listen. "Show me," he told Ranger. The old dog nudged the handle with his nose, tail lifting in a familiar, eager arc. Together, a retired rescuer and his graying German shepherd stepped into the snow, leaving the comfort of the wood stove for the cold, quiet truth buried on the mountain. The path to Hollow Ridge was no longer a path so much as a rumor. The blizzard had erased it in one night, smoothing over footprints and snowmobile tracks with an indifferent hand. Each step Owen took sank to mid-calf, then deeper, the kind of snow that grabbed at his boots like fingers. The cold bit through the seams of his orange jacket, turning his breath into a steady plume that hung in the air like ghosts of words he'd never said. Ranger forged ahead, nose down, weaving a sure line through the drifts. Every few yards his back legs faltered, hips betraying the 11 winters he'd lived. Each time he stumbled, Owen paused, letting the old dog catch his balance, murmuring the sort of encouragement he hadn't used on a living soul in years. "Easy, buddy. We're not on a clock. We've got all night if we need it." The forest around them was quiet, in the way only a deep winter wood could be, sound swallowed by snow, trees standing like dark, robed figures along a white nave. Owen's mind wandered, as it often did when the world narrowed to the crunch of snow and the burn in his lungs. It drifted back not to rescues, but to a kitchen bathed in softer light than his cabin's yellow bulb. Laura standing by the stove, laughing as she burned the grilled cheese again, insisting that a rescue cop could handle dinner if he thought he knew everything. Ranger, a younger, springier version of himself, weaving between their legs for a crust. That kitchen had been warm even in January, filled with bad jokes and simple plans. They'd meant to grow old together in a place just like this cabin, only closer to town, closer to friends. Then came the Christmas Eve pileup on the interstate, the bodies they'd pulled from twisted cars, the one mother Owen didn't get to in time, the lawsuit that followed, the night he came home with the smell of antifreeze and tragedy on his clothes, and Laura said softly, "You're not here anymore, Owen. You're in there," and pointed to his chest. He'd chosen not to answer. Silence, he thought now, stepping over a fallen branch half buried in white, had been his worst habit. Up ahead, Ranger stopped so suddenly that snow sprayed from his paws. His body tensed, tail straight, ears pinned forward. Owen's heart gave a small, traitorous skip. "Got something?" he called, though he knew the answer. He followed the dog through a stand of spruce twisted by wind, where the world opened into a raw wound in the hillside. The landslide had chewed a gash into the ridge, exposing a wall of earth and stone the color of old scars. Pine trees lay uprooted, roots clawing at the sky, their trunks half buried in frozen debris. At the center of the slide, the snow looked wrong. It was mixed with gray ash and blackened splinters of wood, crusted with ice that glinted in the weak light. Ranger descended into the hollow, moving with a focus Owen hadn't seen since their last call-out. He quartered the area methodically, nose close to the ground, taking in quick, sharp breaths. At the far side of the exposed slope, his pace slowed. He moved toward a patch where the earth dipped, like a shallow grave only the snow knew about. Then, with a solemnity that made Owen's skin prickle, Ranger lay down. Not the happy flop of a tired dog claiming a patch of sun, but a deliberate, careful lowering of his body until his chest touched the ash-stained snow. He stretched his front legs forward and laid his chin between his paws, eyes fixed on a particular spot no bigger than a throw pillow. His sides rose and fell, but every other part of him was carved in ice. Owen felt the world narrow to the sound of his own heartbeat. In their working days, That posture had one meaning: human scent, long settled, deep in the ground. Bodies under concrete, under avalanches, under collapsed houses. This wasn't an explosive alert. This was grief. He dropped his pack, ignoring the protest of his knee, and knelt beside Ranger. He pressed a gloved hand to the dog's neck, a wordless, "I'm here." Ranger didn't look at him. His eyes never left the snow. "All right," Owen whispered, throat tight. "Let's see who you brought us to." He brushed the top layer of snow aside with his hands rather than starting with the shovel. It felt wrong to come at this with cold metal. Beneath the snow, the ground was a mix of ice, charred wood, and something that had once been a floor. As he dug, he found hunks of glass melted into strange, clear puddles that had frozen mid-drip, and nails twisted by heat. The burned smell from the rock in his pocket seeped into the air around them, stronger now. Campfire multiplied by 100, fused with the metallic tang of old sorrow. Minutes stretched. His fingers went numb even through the gloves. Just as he thought the whole thing was in his head, and he was an old man sentimentalizing his dog, his hand brushed something that wasn't rock or wood. It was smooth, thin, and cold, with edges too precise to be natural. He scraped more carefully, heart climbing up into his throat. A small rectangle emerged from the frozen earth, blackened but intact. He pulled it free and wiped it with the back of his glove. The letters were faint, eaten at by time, but they were there. A name, a branch of service, a string of numbers. Harrison J. Cole, Rescue Unit. The words hit him with a peculiar force, as if the mountain had just whispered into his ear. Rescue Unit. A brother of sorts. Owen stared at the tag, the wind cutting across the hollow like a quiet hymn. 50 years of snow and thaw, and no one had come for this man. The town below, if it remembered him at all, probably had its own easy story. Some loner up on the ridge, a hermit who burned his cabin down or wandered off drunk into a snowstorm. People liked stories that put distance between themselves and tragedy. Better to say, he made bad choices than we forgot to look for him. Ranger lifted his head just enough to bump the tag in Owen's palm with a cold nose, then settled his chin back on the snow. The message was clear. We found him. Now do your job. Owen swallowed past the lump forming at the base of his tongue. For a moment, he saw himself from above. A man who'd walked away from his marriage, from the city, from the team that used to slap him on the back and call him Cap after a good rescue. A man everyone probably now described as that old hermit up near the lake, the one who lives with the dog. If he slipped on this slope and never made it back, would anyone dig as stubbornly for him? Would anyone push through drifts because something in their chest refused to leave him under the snow? Or would the story be simple? He went off by himself. That's the life he chose. The thought sat heavy in his gut. He closed his fingers around the tag until the metal dug into his palm. Harrison, he said quietly into the cold air, the name unfamiliar and yet strangely close. We're late, but we're here. He glanced down at Ranger. And we're not leaving you up here like a forgotten scarecrow. The dog exhaled, a soft, steaming sigh, and for the first time since lying down, allowed his eyes to flick to Owen's face, as if to be sure the promise was real. In the fragile gray light of that winter afternoon, surrounded by toppled trees and frozen ash, a retired cop an aging German shepherd, and a man who'd been dead half a century formed a strange, sacred triangle. Somewhere far away, bells from a church in town began to toll the hour, sound carried thin on the cold air. To Owen, it didn't sound like time passing. It sounded like a call to action. The same silent command that used to tug at him whenever his radio crackled to life. Only this time, the voice wasn't coming from a dispatcher. It was coming from the dog at his feet, from the tag in his hand, and from the part of his own heart he'd buried under his own landslide of regret. The rain had thinned by dawn, leaving Seattle wrapped in a gray, misty hush as Dr. Nathan Cole loaded Sarah Whitlock and her loyal shepherd Kaya into the back of his aging Subaru Outback, a car he had once used to take his wife on long mountain drives before fate hollowed out the passenger seat beside him. Now that seat held a wounded federal agent whose life had been ripped open in a single night, and who clutched her dog's collar with the fragile determination of someone refusing to let death steal one more thing from her. Nathan tightened a wool blanket around her shoulders, noticing how her breath rattled softly, each inhale a struggle. But her eyes, though rimmed with exhaustion, held a fierce clarity. "We need to get out of the city," she whispered, voice hoarse. "They'll sweep every hospital, every clinic. They'll know I went to ground somewhere." Nathan nodded, glancing in the rearview mirror as he pulled onto the slick morning roads, and for a moment his reflection startled him. He looked younger, somehow more alive than he had allowed himself to feel since losing Emily. Maybe saving someone, saving these two, was waking a part of him he thought had died. The city slowly gave way to winding forest roads, damp evergreens rising like dark guardians on either side, their branches heavy with rain. Kaya rested her head on Sarah's lap, the dogs breathing more even now, but still tired, still stiff with pain. Yet her protective gaze never left the window, as if expecting danger to burst from behind every cedar trunk. Nathan cleared his throat, trying to keep the mood calm. "My family owns an old cabin near Lake Merrow," he said. "Quiet place, nobody around for miles. Haven't been there much since." He didn't finish the sentence, but Sarah's eyes softened, understanding the unspoken weight. "Thank you," she murmured, her fingers drifting through Kaya's fur as though grounding herself. "If we make it through this, it'll be because of you." Nathan shook his head gently. "No. It'll be because you're one tough woman with one tough dog." A faint smile tugged at her lips, and for a heartbeat, the haunted look in her eyes eased. But as they turned toward the foothills of the Cascades, a tremor ran through her, the kind that came not from pain, but memory. Nathan waited, sensing she needed to speak. "Kaya saved me," Sarah finally said, voice trembling. "There were 6 of us on the task force. We thought we had Vane cornered. We didn't know someone inside had flipped." Her jaw tightened, and Kaya lifted her head, ears perked at the tension in her partner's voice. "They ambushed us," Sarah whispered. 3 of my teammates were gone before we even drew our weapons. Kaya pulled me behind a stone barrier, took the bullet meant for my head. Nathan's grip tightened on the steering wheel, the image of the injured shepherd in the alley flooding back. "I'm sorry," he said, softly, knowing words were small compared to her loss. "I lost someone once too. Not like that, but sudden, unexpected." She met his eyes in the mirror, sadness and understanding passing between them like a shared language. They drove in silence for several minutes, the only sound the steady hum of the tires against the wet road and the occasional heavy exhale from Kaya. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Mist curled around the treetops like ghostly fingers, and patches of sunlight broke through, laying pale gold across the winding path. Sarah shifted, wincing as pain flared through her shoulder. Nathan glanced over. "You need more pain medication soon," he said. "Once we reach the cabin, I'll check your vitals again." Sarah nodded, but her eyes flicked to the side view mirror. "We're not being followed," Nathan said, reassuring even himself. "That SUV last night, it was scouting. They don't know I'm involved. They don't know where we're going." Sarah shook her head slowly. "They know I'm alive. That's enough." But she didn't push further. She leaned back as if allowing the trees and mountains to hold her up for a while. After nearly 2 hours of driving, they reached the gravel turnoff to Nathan's family cabin, a winding, secluded road framed by towering pines and the distant glimmer of a lake. The cabin stood exactly as Nathan remembered it, wood weathered by years of storms, a stone chimney rising like a promise of warmth, and the familiar creak of the porch boards as he stepped up. He carried Sarah inside, her arm draped around his shoulders, while Kaya limped close behind. The cabin smelled of cedar and old books, a comforting scent Nathan had avoided for years because it reminded him too much of Emily. Yet now it felt like the safest place left on Earth. He settled Sarah onto the large leather sofa near the fireplace and draped another blanket over her legs. Kaya immediately curled beside her, resting her head on Sarah's thigh, as Nathan started a fire that crackled to life, filling the room with golden warmth. "You're safe here," he said, turning toward her. But Sarah's gaze drifted to the window, her voice barely above a whisper. "Safe. For now." Nathan followed her eyes. Outside, the forest swayed gently in the breeze, peaceful and untouched. But beneath that stillness lay uncertainty, like a breath being held. "They won't find us," Nathan said, though a flicker of doubt stirred in him. "They would need a miracle." Sarah's eyelids drooped from exhaustion, but her final words before sleep claimed her were quiet and chilling. "Vane doesn't need a miracle. He has men who don't stop until the job is done." Kaya shifted closer, placing a protective paw over her partner's leg as the fire popped softly, and in the hush of that mountain cabin, Nathan realized the storm they had fled from was only regrouping behind the trees. And soon it would come, calling again. Night crept over the Cascades with the slow, deliberate weight of a thick wool blanket being drawn across the sky, smothering the last traces of daylight, as Dr. Nathan Cole stoked the fire inside the cabin, watching the embers glow like tiny beating hearts in the dim warmth. Sarah Whitlock slept fitfully on the sofa, her breathing uneven but steadier than it had been on the drive, her face softening in the firelight in a way that made her seem younger, almost peaceful, if not for the tension still lingering around her eyes. Kaya lay curled at her side, the shepherd's ears twitching at every distant sound, the instincts of a trained working dog never letting her fully rest, even as her body begged for recovery. Nathan checked Sarah's bandage again, his gentle fingers pressing near the wound to ensure there was no swelling or fever, and though she didn't wake, her hand moved ever so slightly toward Kaya, as if reaching for an anchor in a drifting sea. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the treetops in long sighs that reminded Nathan of stories his grandmother used to tell him, tales about mountains that whispered warnings before danger arrived, tales the old folks in logging towns still half believed when storms rolled down the slopes. He pulled the heavy curtains shut and stood still for a moment, listening to the deep quiet of the cabin, the kind of quiet that was both comforting and uneasy, like something holding its breath. When Sarah stirred awake with a sudden gasp, Kaya immediately pushed her muzzle against her partner's arm, whining softly in reassurance, and Nathan knelt beside them, offering a warm cup of broth. "You're safe," he murmured, but Sarah shook her head weakly. "No one is ever safe from men like Vane," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steadier than before. "He has resources, people who don't question orders, people who won't stop." Nathan felt a familiar heaviness settle in his chest. He knew loss. He knew fear. But the kind Sarah carried had the sharp edge of someone who had seen betrayal up close. She sipped the broth slowly, her gaze drifting toward the windows as though expecting shadows to peel themselves off the trees and reveal enemies beneath. "I don't want you involved," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved us already, Kaya and me. That should have been the end." Nathan shook his head gently. "I lost someone once," he said quietly. "And if someone had been there to help her, maybe things would have been different. I won't abandon you." Sarah's throat bobbed as she swallowed hard, emotion flickering across her features like a candle flame stirring in the wind. A loud creak sounded from the porch, freezing both of them. Kaya stood up instantly, her injured side forgotten as she positioned herself between Sarah and the door, a low, rumbling growl vibrating through her chest. Nathan's heart pounded as he reached for the old rifle hanging above the mantel, his father's hunting gun, more symbolic than practical, and tiptoed to the front window. The porch was empty, the wooden boards shifting slightly under the chill night air, but something felt wrong, as if the mountain itself had tensed. He backed away and closed the curtains again. "Just the wood settling," he whispered. But Kaya didn't believe it. Her hackles stayed raised, her gaze fixed on the doorway with laser focus. Sarah tried to sit up, wincing but refusing help. "Vane's men are trained for silence," she said grimly. "If they're here, you won't hear them until they want you to." Nathan felt the weight of her words settle on his shoulders as he moved through the cabin, locking windows and checking corners like a man preparing to hold off the night with little more than a heartbeat and an old rifle. Hours trickled by, the fire dimming to soft red coals as midnight approached. Sarah drifted in and out of sleep, each time one hand touching Kaya's fur, as though confirming the dog hadn't vanished. Nathan sat across from them, his back against the stone hearth, staring into the fire's slow breaths. When the power flickered once, then died completely, plunging the cabin into darkness, Kaya snapped to full alert, her growl deep and guttural, the kind of sound that rises from the very spine of a guardian animal. Nathan grabbed a flashlight and clicked it on, the narrow beam slicing through the shadows. The cabin felt suddenly smaller, the darkness outside pressing against the walls like a living thing. "That's not the storm," Sarah whispered sharply, her senses kicking into the hyper-focused state of someone who has survived too many ambushes. "That's a generator cut. Someone killed the power." Nathan listened, holding his breath. The forest outside had gone silent. Not the peaceful silence of night, but the frightening silence of a world holding still. Then came the unmistakable crunch of gravel under a heavy boot. Kaya lunged forward, barking sharply, her body straining despite the pain in her ribs. Nathan froze, flashlight trembling slightly in his hand. Another footstep. Closer. Slow. Purposeful. Sarah reached for the pistol Nathan had laid beside her earlier. She checked the chamber with a shaky but practiced motion, her expression hardening with a mixture of fear and resolve.
"Nathan," she whispered, eyes locked on the front door. "They found us."
And the cabin, which had once been a sanctuary of memories and quiet grief, now felt like a wooden box waiting to be broken open by the darkness gathering outside. AD 77547A. The cabin trembled softly as the footsteps outside grew closer, each one landing with the slow confidence of men who believed they held all the power. And inside, under the dim spill of Nathan's flashlight, time seemed to stretch thin enough to hear every heartbeat. Sarah Whitlock braced herself on the sofa, her injured shoulder throbbing with a deep, pulsing ache. But her grip on the pistol was firm, steady in that quiet way of people who have survived too much to shake now. Kaya stood rooted by her side, the German shepherd's low growl thrumming through the floorboards like a warning from an old, loyal soul. Nathan moved carefully to the far end of the room, clutching the old hunting rifle that had belonged to his father, though he knew the weapon was no match for night vision scopes or suppressed rifles. Still, he held it with the fierce protectiveness of a man who has already lost too much. A sudden thud against the back door made Kaya lunge forward, barking with a ferocity that belied her stitched side. Sarah caught her by the collar with her good arm.
"Not yet, girl," she whispered. "Not until we have a chance."
Shadows slid under the doorframe as if the darkness itself were creeping inside. Then a voice, smooth and cold, seeped through the cracks between the boards. "Agent Whitlock, you're a hard woman to kill." Nathan's blood chilled. Sarah's jaw tightened.
"Vane,"
she breathed, her eyes narrowing, as if focusing on a ghost she'd hoped never to see again. "You should have stayed down that night," the voice continued, almost conversational. "But then, you always did have a habit of meddling." Nathan lifted the rifle, heart pounding so loud he feared everyone could hear it. The door handle turned slowly. Sarah nodded to Nathan, a silent signal. "Brace." Then everything happened at once. The back door burst inward with a violent crack, splinters scattering across the kitchen like shrapnel. Kaya sprang before Sarah could hold her, launching herself with the fury of a creature who would rather die than let harm reach her partner. A mercenary stepped through the doorway, night vision goggles glinting green as Kaya slammed into his arm, teeth sinking into fabric and flesh. He snarled, stumbling back, firing a wild, suppressed shot that buried into the wall just inches above Nathan's head. Within the same heartbeat, another shape slipped through the front doorway, a second mercenary, moving with the deadly grace of a trained predator. Sarah pivoted despite her injury, raising her pistol and firing two controlled shots, one hitting the man's thigh, the other striking his arm and sending his weapon skittering across the wooden floor. Nathan darted forward, using the rifle to knock him to the ground before the man could reach for the gun again. And then a third figure emerged from the darkness. Vane himself, dressed in a dark coat untouched by mud or rain, as if the forest parted politely for him. He stepped around the writhing mercenary Kaya was still subduing, his eyes fixed on Sarah with a cruel, amused calm. "You cost me everything," he said quietly, leveling his pistol at her. "And you still don't know when to quit." Sarah aimed back, but her wounded shoulder buckled, pain shooting up her neck. The pistol slipped from her grasp, skidding across the floor toward Nathan. Vane smiled as he shifted his aim. "Goodbye, Agent Whitlock." But before the shot could ring out, a deep, mechanical roar cut through the forest canopy outside, shaking the cabin walls.
Wind blasted through the broken door as a helicopter's spotlight ignited the clearing in blinding white. A booming, amplified voice rolled across the pines. "Federal Tactical Response Team! Drop your weapons and surrender now!" Vane spun, momentarily thrown off by the sudden assault. Sarah lunged, not with her hands, but with her voice. "Kaya!" she shouted, pointing at Vane. The shepherd released the mercenary and hurled herself at Vane with everything she had left, knocking his arm wide just as a suppressed round snapped harmlessly into the ceiling beam. Nathan scrambled across the floor, grabbed the fallen pistol, and aimed at Vane, just as the cabin filled with boots and shouts. Federal agents swarmed the room, subduing the mercenaries with swift, practiced movements. One agent rushed to Nathan and Sarah, shouting for medics. Vane fought, but Kaya's teeth stayed locked on his sleeve until two agents pulled him to the ground and snapped cuffs around his wrists. Finally, the room still. The firefight ended as abruptly as it began, leaving behind the soft crackle of the dying fire and the ragged breaths of the three souls who had survived it. Nathan dropped the pistol, shaking, and hurried to Sarah's side as Kaya limped back to her, pressing her head against Sarah's knee, whining as relief and pain mingled in her voice. Sarah's eyes softened, her hand falling weakly to the dog's fur. "Good girl. You saved us again." Nathan crouched beside them, letting out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since the night began. Sarah looked at him, not as a stranger, not as a rescuer, but as someone whose life had unexpectedly intertwined with his in the storm. "Nathan," she whispered, exhaustion pulling at her voice. "I didn't think we'd make it." He touched her hand gently. "We did," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you're never facing this alone again." As the medics lifted her onto the stretcher and Kaya trotted faithfully alongside, Nathan stepped out onto the porch where dawn was beginning to press pale light through the pines. The long night was over. The danger was gone. And somewhere deep inside, beneath years of silence and grief, Nathan felt something steady and warm begin to grow again. Something like a promise.
In the quiet after so many storms, it is the loyal dog who often teaches us the most about courage and healing. After everything Kaya endured, the gunfire, the darkness, the long night in the pines, her life has opened into a new chapter, one shaped not by fear, but by trust, safety, and the gentle hands that carried her through. And for Sarah and Nathan, whose lives were torn apart and stitched back together in the span of a single night, this brave shepherd has become more than a partner. She has become a symbol of second chances, of the unexpected blessings that arrive when hope seems lost. As we leave their story behind, let us send our prayers for peace, safety, and brighter days ahead for all three of them. If this journey touched your heart, please like this video and subscribe for more extraordinary stories of loyalty, courage, and the mysterious ways life brings us together.